Okay, the subject of the lesson I'm going to talk about today is unreality. God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. That's the golden text, and I love when the lesson talks about truth and error in terms of darkness and light. And I can tell you why. I remember the first time in Sunday school when we talked about where does the darkness or error go when you light even a candle of truth. I remember the Sunday school teacher saying, it goes to its native nothingness. And for the first time, I really caught a glimpse of the truth and matter, mortal mind, or the so-called dark things of life, have no reality. The darkness doesn't go anywhere. It's just seen to be nothingness. And it was the lesson on the candle and the darkness that gave me such an insight when I was just pretty much a young chicken in Sunday school. In the responsive reading, which is very upbeat and filled with truth, the verse 18, violence shall no more be heard in thy land, wasting nor destruction within thy borders. But thou shalt call the wall salvation and thy gates praise. Now that's a wonderful citation, particularly the insights that I get from the second part of it. But thou shalt call thy wall salvation and thy gates praise. Now that is not a simile as saying, well, your walls are like salvation and that your gates act as praise. They are saying your walls are spiritual. They are salvation. And the gates are not like peace. The gates are praise. They are both ideas. And the reason I love that is this is Eddie's statement to one of her students when she was teaching. And I know I've shared this before, but it's just so seminal to understanding of things. I'm going to repeat it again. This is Eddie asked one of her students, he touched his arm and said, what is this? And he began to talk kind of in similes. Well, it's like strength. It's like movement. It's several other qualities. And she said no. And I think he was probably shocked. She said, it is spiritual. And she just put matter out of the equation completely. It's an idea. It is a concept. It's an idea. And that is what I saw in verse 18. But thou shalt call thy walls what they are, salvation. They are spiritual, and thy gates praise. It is spiritual. Okay. Then verse 21. I've been intrigued by how to interpret this constantly reoccurring. People also shall be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified. What exactly does that glorified mean? And what is the process of glorification? And it came to me very clearly, thinking on it in connection with this lesson. God is glorified by his spiritual children. He is his beloved children, ideas. And when we know that, and we live as his spiritual ideas, we are glorifying him, and we are being glorified. That's what Jesus spoke of as glorification. And it became very clear to me. I'd like to know if other people have a different concept of glorification. Okay. Section 1. Now let's see. It cries out, the entire section, God is good, do us good, teach me thy statutes. And the Isaiah passage here is very much, to me, like Genesis 1. And that was written when the Jews were returning after exile. And they had kind of the adulteration was possible to their own religion from the religion of the Babylonians. This is 539 BC, I think. But don't call me on that. But it is like the chapter 1. And chapter 1 was a restatement of God is all in all. Now the vocabulary in verse 18 is very interesting, I think, about heavens and the earth. There are a lot of knots in it, N-O-T. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I have not spoken in secret in a dark place of the earth. I said not unto the seed of Jacob, seek me in vain. There's another not, another in vain or negative. Assemble yourselves and come, draw near together, ye that are escaped of the nations. They have no knowledge, another negative, that set up the wood of their graven image. And then in verse 22, I think there's a very strong statement that I cling to for several reasons. Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God and there is none else. This is, and probably is not well-founded in my thought, but nevertheless, I so much like this better statement. I am God and there is none else. The other statement we have is, thou shalt love the Lord thy God and have no other gods beside him. But this says there are no other gods beside him. The other says he's first among other gods, or it hints that. And there's, to me, some little adulterization of the idea of one God, one truth, one life, one principle. When you say, thou shalt have no other gods before me, it's as though God's in line. He happens to be first. But this says, in a renewal of the Spirit in Isaiah, for I am God and there is none else. I just like that positive to me as a student, so I don't get fouled up with, greater than other gods. Let's see. And this clarity of there being only one God is, of course, repeated in the Science and Health section that follows. Divine science this is in citation 2. In divine science, which is the seal of dignity and has the impress of heaven. And I don't ever remember reading those words, seal and impress, but they are strong words. God is revealed as infinite light. In the eternal mind, no night is there. There are no other gods. And it led me to do some studying of the 91st Psalm. And because in the biography that I read of Mary Baker Eddy, Christian healer, brought out so much that she thought the 91st Psalm was just the best. And he that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. The secret place of the Most High is divine science. There is our safeness and our security. And I think that was just a great statement. Then at the end of section 1, in citation 5, I'd like to make this comment. Christian science brings to light truth and its supremacy, universal harmony, the entireness of God good, and the nothingness of evil. And I've noted here, because I work a great deal with other Christians in Bible study and in Vesper services here, that here we Christian scientists stand alone. This is the church, this is the Christ message, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. There is the sense among other Christians that God is greater than evil, but not the nothingness of evil. And that, of course, is the basis of healing and spiritual growth. And that's very important because I have found in no other Christian sect any idea whatsoever that mortal mind and matter are the same thing. And there is no mortal mind, and there is no evil, and there is no matter. And that is just shocking to most other people. Okay. Now, so the section 1 was a reaffirmation of there is one God, and he is good. Okay. Then in section 2, verse 28 of Psalms, for thou wilt light my candle. That takes me back to my Sunday school class. The Lord my God will enlighten thy darkness. The idea appears again in section 3, which we'll handle. And with Moses and the proving of his the nature of God and the success that Moses will have when he goes to the children of Israel. There were 2 trials that he went through, and of course the first was turning the serpent into a staff. But in the history of the Middle East, there were conjurers in the king's courts who could do that as a trick of some kind, illusion of some kind. I think that's interesting. So that was not impressive enough for the people to think that God had spoken to Moses. But when he had his hand turn leprous, and then he came out, when he pulled it out, it was whole. That's healing. And that, and the last verse says, and the people believed. And it shall come to pass, they will not believe thee, neither hearken to the voice of the first sign, that they will believe the voice of the latter sign. I think that's why Mrs. Eddy stressed so much healing as the essence of the Christ within the church. then in the Science and Health, the passage appeared that I was going to use in several lessons ago. Spiritual sense contradicting the material senses involves, and then it has a list of the kind of phases of understanding that we go through. Involves intuition, hope, faith, understanding, fruition, reality. And if you go through many of the healings of Jesus, you can see that those that were healed in so many instances had within their thought some intuition, some hope, some faith, some understanding, each stronger and stronger until there is fruition, which I take as healing. And then she puts on another one. I mean, Science and Health ends with fruitage, but this growth of understanding of spiritualization of thought here goes all the way to reality, which is to see spiritually, to know ourselves as spiritual ideas. That's reality. And then I love that listing of phases of thought. Let's see. In thy light shall we see light. I've used that quite often. Healing. Then it can, I seem to always be in verse 18 of something, citation 18, line 18 here. When the real is attained, which is announced by science, joy is no longer a trembler, nor is hope a cheat. Much literature today, I am on a committee for selection of library books for our library, the famous Library Selection Committee. And I'm to read reviews of literature. Yes. Well, I was given the New York Times, Christian Science Monitor, and one other forecast magazine to look through for reviews of books. And there is such a concentration on angst, on people in dysfunctional families telling their stories. There is so much joy as a trembler and hope as a cheat. And it's become difficult for me to recommend any books because they don't lift our thought or spread our thought toward the right direction. Exactly. Now that's not the kind I recommend, but some that have some positive either entertainment or positive enlightenment on the human condition. And you see, they don't see life, in thy light shall we see light. They examine the darkness, so many of the books. And I try to know that the Christ is active, always has been, and eventually we will all see light in thy light. Okay. Section 3 has one of my favorite verses started. There is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth him understanding. That is so reassuring that the Christ is in action at all times. I thought at that point, and even a little later, hymn 202, O dreamer, leave thy dream for joyful waking. O captive, rise and sing, for thou art free. The Christ is here, all dreams of error breaking, unloosing bonds of all captivity. That the Christ is here. When the verse in section 3, there is spirit in man, the Christ at work. And I'm so happy about the Christ at work. So reassuring. But then in 2 Timothy, we're given direction. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman. I mean, we can't just sit back and say, well, the Christ is here and he'll take care of it. We've got to work. Let's see what I can... this is the tares and the wheat, the parable that has always troubled me. I've listened to the explanations, but I wasn't quite sure what the parable was getting at. And then in the Sentinel, this week's Sentinel, I think it is the Sentinels for Unreality. It's a wonderful explanation that I would point out and has given me much joy. It states that in Matthew 13, section 3, the parable of the tares and the wheat tells the story of this basic principle of the illusion of discord. Jesus often spoke in parables, which are a kind of metaphor. What's so nice about the metaphors I spoke earlier, thy walls are salvation, not like salvation. They are typically short sayings or stories set in familiar agricultural settings, but then they have a surprise ending. Now that was new to me, to think of it with a surprise ending. And then he reviews the story and says, in this story, the servant offers to pull out the weeds or tares, but the owner of the field says to wait until the harvest, when it is easier to tell the difference between the wheat and the tares. Instead of turning this parable into an allegory, with the harvest being Judgment Day, when God will separate the good and the bad, which is how many Christian communities have read it, we can read it as a true parable with a revealing surprise ending. In this story, the owner does not make a big deal about the tares. In fact, they turn out to be a blessing, a source for fuel, as if to say, don't make a reality out of evil. God's kingdom is what's real, and it is wholly good. Fear of the tares might be likened to the mortal existence that science and health describes as deception. And then there's a quote. You command the situation if you understand that mortal existence is a state of self-deception and not the truth of being. So I am now very content with the tares and the wheat. I know how to interpret it. Pardon me? Yes, right, exactly. And the reason for letting the tares stay there was the confidence that spiritual understanding is the line of demarcation between the unreal. The tares really are real as a threat. And I think that's important. And burning the tares, which is commanded, is a positive thing when they are at a certain stage, as fuel. The understanding of their nothingness as a challenge of evil allows them to be used as something for good. Don't you think that's interesting? Yes, okay. Now let's see, we come to section 3 of the Science and Health, and there is the statement, understanding is the line of demarcation between the real and unreal. Spiritual understanding unfolds mind, and that unfolds the difference between the challenge of the tares as though they're real and that of their unreality as evil because there is no evil, and the use of them as something which was good. And Spirit imparts that wherever there is the act of Christ. Okay, section 4. Interesting, we have again a healing that Jesus does not want the leper to go and publish it. And when I was in Bible class, they always call this, it's from Mark, the mystery in Mark, why Jesus did that. But a sense that has come to me, and I'd like others to think about that and talk with me about it sometime. Says, and he straightly charged him and forthwith sent him away, that he should not tell anybody. See thou say nothing to any man. Now in other Gospels, the healed people just went and jumped around and shouted for joy. And I think it was, was it Bartimaeus or somebody else who actually followed Jesus after he was healed. But I think Jesus was being wise about rousing up the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and all those guys against him as he progressed in his mission. That they might well have been, they would close down on him faster. And so he tried to protect himself. But the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light, and they followed after him and couldn't keep quiet. But he did a good job in the time he had. So we all agree on that. Okay. Yes. And I like the reinforcement of the healing in the Bible with a list of some of Mrs. Eddy's healings. I think it's important. The truth. It changes the secretions, expels the humors, dissolves tumors, relaxes rigid muscles, restores carious bones to soundness, etc., etc., etc. And the one healing that I thought was outstanding to me, well, they all were, but that I read in the Christian Healer book, that Mrs. Eddy's relatives had been just awful to her about her search for the statement of divine science. But of course she loved her way through that. And then one of the cousins had a child that was really very badly, I think it was deformed, I don't remember what it was, but came to Mrs. Eddy and asked for healing. And Mrs. Eddy told about this healing. And she said, I was so glad I could finally show them that I'm on the right track or something like that. And she healed the child or the person, but she got a call from the mother to say that there was one part of the healing that didn't work. There was some deforming that remained. Mrs. Eddy said, I threw myself on my knees and I turned to God and I said, what don't I know about you? And then she said, it didn't work because I thought Mary was doing it instead of God. And when she turned it over in prayer to God, the mother called shortly thereafter and the child was healed. I thought that was kind of neat. But again, it connects very much with Jesus' healing, that he didn't want it going abroad, that Jesus, could heal like that. It was God who was doing the healing, and he needed more time behind the wall of salvation to spread this mission. It didn't make cut short or invaded. Okay. Section 5, the use of light. This day is salvation. Oh, this is Zacchaeus. I don't know how you pronounce it in English. In Latin, it's Zacchaeus, chief among the publicans. And of course, they all think it's terrible that he's dealing with this publican. But when it says, "For the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost," I think that was his original statement. I have come to those who are lost in the house of Israel. But of course, he came and spread light to all men. I am come a light into the world, and whoever believes on me should not abide in darkness. So it went beyond the house of Israel to all mankind. Let's see. She gives us, in section 5, instructions on some points to hold to in healing. The divine method of paying sin's wages involves unwinding one's snarls and learning from experience how to divide between sense and soul. And I think that is very clear and very helpful. There's another quote that she has about the practitioner must win his own forgiveness or clarity from sin before can witness God's healing. So it sets us at work. Okay. Now, at Whitehorse Village, where I live, in Section 6, we have at Whitehorse Village a mission statement as to what our mission in life is, how to care for people, how to treat each individual, etc. And in citation 16 of 2 Corinthians, I think Paul gives us kind of a mission statement. No, this is in Matthew. I'm sorry. This is in Matthew. And it's from Jesus. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. And I just got a publication that said Whitehorse Village has been declared the best CCRC in Delaware County. And no, it's because we followed our mission statement. Let your light so shine before men. This is the glorification of God, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. And in that we are also glorified. Then there's a repetition in section 6 of know thyself. That's study to be a workman. Excuse me. And God will supply the wisdom and the occasion for a victory over evil. Now, I'd also like to read, because this lesson on Unreality sent me to one of my favorite articles in the first book of classic articles. And it's by L. Ivan Gewalter. And I've talked several times about the activity of the Christ in this lesson, which is the answer to the claim, the reality of evil, that evil is unreal. Because of this, the act of Christ that kept coming to me. So I looked it up, and there was this article, The Activity of the Christ. And it is so uplifting that I'd like just to read one or two little paragraphs to finish the uplift that this lesson gave to me. The irresistible Christ is the power of mind. There is no healing, no redemption, no salvation but by this power. Healing, redemption, and salvation are not in matter. The power of mind is the Messiah, and salvation depends upon the demonstration of God as the mind of man. The Christ truth must be lived and practiced and not theorized about. The Christ then shows forth God's infinite knowing, the glory of spiritual being, the radiance of spiritual might. Individual spiritual man is not a separate finite ego, as personal sense would have us believe. He exists to glorify God, and he reflects or expresses the eternal, infinite individuality or mind, which includes itself, within itself, every expression of God, from the least to the greatest. What a gift that is to us, under the shadow of the Almighty. Let's see. The Christ is the presence of the power of God and the power of the presence of God. The Christ is never static. The manifestation of God's functioning presence, which is the Christ, never ceases. It is never congested. It is never confused, obscured, obstructed, nor can it ever be reversed. It never comes to an end, never overworks, never wavers, never stops. Let's see what Christian Science, through its revelation of the Christ, enables us to commute the mesmeric sentence of personal sense, to banish the bondage of heredity, and to claim the reality and royalty of our being in spirit. It was the Christ, the spiritual idea, that appeared to whom this is the man Jesus. It is the Christ that appears to human consciousness today as science. If we would find our individuality and identity, and the individuality and identity of our loved ones, we must not stoop down and look into the sepulcher of personal sense. We must look up and let science reveal the spiritual nature of man and the universe. Consciousness is never on a cross or in a tomb, nor does spiritual consciousness include a cross or a tomb. Mind's conscious existence is as inescapable of being impaired as is the dawn. It forever includes only the things of God, of eternal life and everlasting love. Jesus' triumph over death shows us our present immortality. Let's see, one last thing. He demonstrated life in the fullness of its glory. He knew that the one spirit or soul includes the beauty and variety of form, outline, color of all that spirit soul reflects, includes the Christ in its full orb, glory, and radiance. The Christ is the presence of the power of God and the power of the presence of God, and man in God's likeness shines forth. Don't you think that's uplifting? Well, one last. Crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, birth, death, and all that appears to go on between these points belong to the human concept. The Christ is not resurrected, nor has it ever ascended. It exists as ever-present and abides in the mind of God. The Christ is forever at the standpoint of perfection. Isn't that nice? Okay, it's a nice upbeat thing. And also, as my farewell, hymn 278, it begins, Pilgrim on earth, home and heaven are within thee, heir of the ages and child of the day. And that's also where it is watched over, cared for, beloved, and protected. If you want to wrap yourself in love every morning, just go to 278, the first verse. It will remind you that you are heir of the ages and child of the day. You are cared for, watched over, beloved, and protected. It's been such a help to me. So, my dear, we had a good time, and I hope it recorded.